Do you have any last words? The alien judge's voice echoed through the chamber, cold and hollow, as if it had been scraped off the floor of some forgotten dungeon. Kale Voss didn't flinch. Chained at the wrists and ankles, blood drying at the edge of his mouth, he raised his head just enough to smirk and mutter. Yeah. You're going to regret not researching my mom. The silence that followed wasn't from fear. It was from confusion. Because none of them, none of the 13 robed Galactic judges, had any idea what a human mother could become when her only son was marked for death. They called it a closed case. The court files were locked the moment the verdict was typed into the high tribunal system. Kale Voss, accused of destabilizing the quantum neurogrid on Colony Delta 6, had been sentenced to execution without appeal. The footage presented against him was tampered, the witnesses bought, and the supposed attack was nothing more than a corrupted code patch he'd written while freelancing on an alien gig economy app. But to the judges, he wasn't innocent. He was human. Which meant, in their eyes, he was disposable. Counselor Turvac leaned forward with his customary sneer, tapping his clawed finger against the data slate as if the weight of the law sat in his grip. This is not Earth, boy. You don't get democracy here. You get order. Efficient, brutal order. Behind him, the other judges nodded, draped in gleaming robes and false dignity. They didn't see a young man trying to make a life off-world. They saw leverage. A scapegoat for a cyber attack orchestrated by one of their own allies. A loose end to be cleaned up. 72 hours, the guards had whispered. That's how long he had before the council's sentence would be carried out. There were no appeals. No visitors. No mercy. Kale had known fear before. Flunking out of engineering school, getting fired on Earth, running out of credits on a mining moon. But this was different. This wasn't failure. This was someone else's lie wrapped around his neck like a noose. And worse, there was no way to send a message to anyone back home. At least, that's what the judges thought. Across the stars, thousands of light years away, Amira Voss paused in her garden, a quiet mountain retreat nestled against the snowy edges of the old Colorado range. She was trimming her rosemary plants when the wind changed. Not just a breeze, something colder. Something that hadn't touched her skin in years. Then a sound. A vibration beneath the soil. A pulse deep in the earth. Her wristwatch lit up with a flashing alert. Not from her local server. Not even from her own network. A dormant signal she had buried decades ago beneath layers of quantum encryption had been triggered. She stood slowly, her breath catching just once before she whispered. They really did it. Inside her home, she didn't run. She didn't panic. She walked. Calm. Measured. The kind of walk that tells you something is about to die. The cabin's floor creaked under her boots as she crossed the living room and knelt beside a thick wooden slab. She removed the rug, pressed her thumb to a hidden panel, and watched as the boards split open. Inside, resting in darkness, lay a steel case, matte black, scratched from past wars, stamped with a sigil long erased from Earth's official military history. A single word glowed on its face, ashen. She didn't open it right away. She placed her hand over it like a prayer. Her son was all she had. Not just her blood, but her redemption. When she lost her husband in the Mars uprising, when she was discharged from Earth's covert operations program with a sealed file and a scar across her shoulder, it was Kale who gave her a reason to stay out of the shadows. She had raised him without ever letting him see what she used to be. Until now. The lid unlatched with a hiss. Inside, folded like an ancient promise, was the armor. Lightweight, reflective only to certain spectrums, designed to evade sight, sound, and even memory. Alongside it, a short-barrel plasma launcher, a set of neural override spikes, and one thing the galaxy never knew Earth had perfected, a synthetic consciousness tethered to a single directive: clean the mess. She activated it with 3 words. Find my son. But the voice that answered her didn't ask for details or proof. It simply replied, Targets confirmed. Operation begins. Back in the council chambers, Turvac was already celebrating. He raised a glass of some foul-smelling alien alcohol and laughed with a couple of off-world senators. Humans always think they matter. A few rebellions, some primitive explosives, and suddenly they think they're players in the galaxy. Earth needs to be reminded they are guests, not gods. The guards joined in, loud and oblivious. Only one aide, a slender insected clerk named Silex, seemed unsure. He had watched Kale's trial. Something about it didn't add up. But he was new, low-ranking, and far too smart for his own good. The next day, a disturbance rocked the orbital security array. A single pod entered unauthorized space, no ID, no trajectory logs. The defense system fired automatically. Lasers crisscrossed the sky, but the pod didn't burn. It vanished mid-air. Not cloaked. Not destroyed. Gone. Seconds later, the docking bay doors registered a manual override. A door opened with no life form detected. Then a scream. Then silence. Guards began disappearing during shift changes. Cameras flickered. Halls locked from the inside. By the time someone realized the primary AI had been replaced by something else, it was too late. The council's main screen flickered on. A single message scrolled across and read, "Verdict rejected. New trial commencing." Silex tried to warn them. He stammered through data logs, showing proof that the security system had been hijacked not by a virus, but by a human consciousness laced into the grid. Turvac scoffed. "A human? In our systems? That's like a cockroach navigating a starship." But Silex wasn't laughing. He had read the archived files, the ones they weren't supposed to open. Files about Earth's first cleaner. A weapon made human. A myth used only once. Deployed in a forgotten war where no one survived to tell what happened. Except for those who woke up with every memory burned out, and a strange symbol etched into their walls. Now that symbol had returned. Burned into the floor of the docking bay. A circle. A slash. And one word beneath it, left in seared metal. Ashen. The council guards were trained for war zones, planetary riots, even minor rebellions. But none of their drills had prepared them for vanishing comrades. The disappearances started slowly, almost politely. One sentry missing during a handoff, another replaced by static on the surveillance feed. Then a team of 4 failed to check in. When a recon unit was sent after them, only a single plasma rifle was found on the floor of Corridor E9, still warm, trigger fused shut. There were no scorch marks. No blood. Just silence. The kind that creeps along your spine and whispers, "You're next." Counselor Turvac didn't care. He brushed off the reports with a wave of his ornate claw, chuckling as he adjusted the synthetic gems on his robe. "A few malfunctions, a few cowards running off. Typical Earth theatrics. We'll find the prankster soon enough." The arrogance in his voice didn't come from ignorance. It came from belief. He genuinely thought no one from a dirt-covered human planet could breach his palace. But others were beginning to question that belief. Silex, the aide, had skipped protocol and accessed the Level 3 archives. There, he found an image, a blurred still frame of a figure in black armor, walking straight through a laser grid without triggering a single alarm. The timestamp matched the first missing guard report. Even stranger, the figure was carrying something, a small canister marked with an Earth emblem long thought retired. It wasn't a weapon. It was a memory core, outdated by galactic standards but still capable of housing thousands of recorded identities. And it had been plugged into the Council's mainframe. Silex ran the scans again. The core had rewritten part of the security protocol, carving itself a backdoor. The system hadn't been hacked. It had been invited in. Meanwhile, inside the Council complex, the cleaner moved without sound. Every step was mapped in advance, every angle calculated. He passed motion detectors and retinal scanners as if they were ornamental. The armor he wore wasn't just for combat. It fed him data, mapped neural clusters from a distance, filtered heartbeats through walls. On Earth, they had once called him a myth. Now, in the Council's deepest levels, he was the ghost in the circuits. He paused at a control room door and watched through the thermal glass. 3 guards, 1 technician. They were relaxed, laughing. He reached to his belt and pulled a small disc. He pressed it against the wall. It dissolved on contact and released a silent pulse. Inside, the guards froze, mouth still mid-joke, eyes widening as they found themselves unable to move. Their bodies didn't drop. They simply stopped. Systems intact. Memories frozen. Alive, but no longer aware. Elsewhere, Turvac was preparing a message for the Galactic broadcast net, intending to make an example of Kale. He'd have him moved into a high-visibility chamber for interrogation, spin the narrative, claim that humanity's so-called freedom fighters were destabilizing peaceful governance. As he rehearsed his lines, the lights above flickered. A long, slow pulse. Once. Twice. On the third flicker, the temperature dropped. The Council's AI stuttered, then glitched entirely. Screens went dark. Turvac screamed for his attendants, but the doors behind him sealed with a heavy thud. He was alone. In the lower holding blocks, Kale sat in silence, unaware of the chaos unraveling above. His cell's walls buzzed with low-frequency static, meant to destabilize a human's inner ear and induce nausea over time. But he was past that now. Numbed by days of confinement and the certainty of death, he barely registered when the lights dimmed and went out. Then a click. Not the mechanical clang of a door unlocking, but the softer sound of air pressure equalizing. His eyes adjusted to a new silhouette in the dark. Not a guard. The figure didn't speak. It approached the cell and placed the device on the lock. The lock hissed once, then fell off, useless. Kale stood but didn't move forward. The figure nodded once and turned away. Kale followed, drawn by instinct more than trust. They passed 2 corridors filled with unconscious guards, none of them harmed. Just immobilized. Kale looked back once, and that's when he saw it. Etched into the wall near his cell, using only heat, was a symbol he didn't recognize, at least not at first. A circle. A diagonal slash. No name. But something about it felt personal. Like it had been meant for him. In the command tower, Silex was running out of options. He had tried to trigger the emergency lockdown, but the override had been rerouted. He had tried to contact off-world allies, but the external comms were dead. The only thing left was an old emergency beacon that broadcast on a buried Earth frequency. He activated it, unsure whether it would reach anyone at all. The message was simple. Unknown intruder. High-value council members threatened. Request immediate response. He didn't expect an answer. Back in the shadows of the eastern wing, the cleaner climbed toward the primary council vault. This was no longer a rescue mission. Kale had been secured. Now came the audit. The judges who voted on the execution, who accepted bribes to bury evidence, would be held accountable. Not in the galactic courts. On Earth, we had a different kind of courtroom. One where truth was pried from the guilty by force if needed. The vault opened to retinal scan, but the cleaner bypassed it by projecting a copy of Turvac's retina. The AI system accepted it without hesitation. Inside, sealed evidence files blinked to life: transactions, communications, falsified documents. All of it logged and duplicated in an Earth-compatible core drive. Turvac had no idea how close the fire was. He paced his chamber, still trying to connect to someone. Anyone. In a desperate move, he ordered his private mercenary squad to be deployed, only to find their transport had been grounded. Not by sabotage. By rerouting their landing clearance to a dead moon. Someone was puppeteering his entire network. And that someone had just disabled every emergency override left in the building. It wasn't just infiltration. This was judgment. The final blow came without sound. One of the judges, Raldo, tried to flee in a stealth ship. As the ship rose from the hangar, its engines froze mid-burn and the vessel hovered before crashing straight back into its bay. The wreckage was clean, controlled descent, not a fireball. The judges were not being executed. They were being displayed. Shaken, rattled, exposed. Silex watched the feed in silence. He understood now. This wasn't war. It was message delivery. Someone was telling the galaxy that Earth didn't forget. That it watched. That when pushed, it would not come begging for justice. It would come cleaning house. And at the center of it all was a name that wasn't spoken anymore. Not on Earth. Not in council halls. But it was back now. Burned into every terminal the cleaner passed. A name erased from history, now rewritten in fear. Ashen. Counselor Turvac's robe dragged across the floor as he stormed into the upper chamber, surrounded by a security escort that had already been halved in the last 12 hours. His voice cracked with fury as he barked orders to seal all exits and reroute power to the defense grid, but the words rang hollow. The guards didn't meet his eyes. Their shoulders were tight, their grips shaky. Most of them had already seen the footage. Entire patrols disappearing. Security turrets spinning in slow, useless circles. Doors opening and closing without a single hand near a panel. It wasn't sabotage. It was precision. Something inside the council complex was not only avoiding detection, it was rewriting the rules of the building itself. Turvac refused to admit it out loud, but deep inside, he knew they had lost control. Silex stood to the side, hands behind his back, holding in the tremor in his arms. He had reviewed every piece of footage the cleaner left behind, and none of it made logical sense. Hallways filled with vapor that disabled only specific lifeforms, files pulled from supposedly dead systems, and then there was the most recent event. Judge Nethro, one of the oldest and most feared in the council, had tried to trigger an off-site evac shuttle. It launched perfectly fine. Then 2 minutes later, it came back. Not exploded. Not hijacked. Just returned. Inside was Nethro, still strapped into his seat, breathing, fully conscious, and trapped inside a soundproof field, screaming at nothing. The only thing on board with him was a note carved into the glass. It said, "I object." The cleaner didn't kill without reason. He didn't destroy randomly. He judged. He mimicked. He reversed the tools of oppression back onto those who built them. The message was clear. Every crime the council had ever committed, every execution, every betrayal, every lie used as law, would be turned against them. Turvac had built an empire on show trials and fear. Now, fear had taken form and come knocking. In the dim corridors below the council chambers, the cleaner moved like a shadow through memory. His neural feed replayed voice logs and visuals of the trial. He saw Kale standing alone, accused by manipulated evidence. He traced the source of the footage. Each loop of the accusation was tied back to a single council member who had signed off on the edits. Each of them would be held accountable. The first, Judge Mullen, was found floating above the central atrium, suspended by gravity fields that gently rotated him upside down. Not dead, but forced to watch the court chamber through a one-way glass for hours while the feed of Kale's fake confession played on loop. Another, Judge Harvex, had built his entire reputation on psychological warfare. He was trapped inside a mirror cell now, every wall reflecting his face. But each reflection shifted slightly, repeating the words he'd once shouted at innocent defendants. "You are guilty because I said so." Now, he heard it from hundreds of mouths. His own. Over and over. Kale sat in the lower wing, wrapped in a thermal cloak, the first warmth he'd felt in days. He had no idea who the cleaner really was, or why he was helping. The guards who had been assigned to torture him were now nowhere to be found. The cell doors had opened without a word. No soldiers came for him. Just that figure. The armored one. Who nodded and walked away without explanation. Kale couldn't shake the feeling that something about the man felt familiar. Not the armor or the silence, but the way he moved. Deliberate. Controlled. Like someone who had once fought to protect, not just punish. In the data hub, Silex made the connection. He had seen enough to know this was no rogue mercenary. The cleaner had accessed and compiled full judicial logs from the last 25 cycles. Every false conviction, every financial transfer tied to a bribe, every overridden verdict, all archived and uploaded to a public server. The file was set to auto-release in 24 hours unless manually stopped. The problem was, no one could find where the command was coming from. It wasn't tied to any terminal. The cleaner wasn't in the system. He was the system. Turvac ordered the creation of an emergency tribunal. His plan was to pin the entire situation on a rogue Earth faction, paint Kale as the inside man, and declare war powers to justify a military response. The broadcast was set, the podium readied, and the speech loaded into his personal scroll. But just before the stream began, the lights dimmed again. A low vibration passed through the floor. One of the council aides stepped forward, eyes glazed, mouth moving out of sync with his words. Then, his voice changed. It wasn't his. It was someone else speaking through him. A voice that was too calm. Too measured. This tribunal is invalid. This sentence is reversed. The aide collapsed, unconscious, and the cameras cut to black. The cleaner didn't stop at psychological operations. He moved next to the council archive, an underground data vault that held recordings of all sealed trials and expunged records. No one accessed it without 3 senior judge codes. Yet the door opened for him. Inside, walls of information glowed like frozen stars. He selected files. Played them. Stored them. Transmitted them to satellites orbiting every major galactic broadcast relay. The trials of hundreds of innocent citizens buried under corruption were now preparing to go public. It wouldn't just be revenge. It would be history correcting itself. One final target remained. Counselor Turvac. The man who signed the execution order with the same hand he used to toast trade deals with corporate warlords. He now paced in a panic, issuing threats, attempting to call in military assistance from allies across the sector. But Earth had already blocked all communications using a frequency dampener the Council never knew existed. It hadn't been used since the Solar Wars. A dampener keyed to Turvac's genetic frequency. No matter where he ran, no message would ever get out. He was alone, surrounded by the palace he built, and a cleaner who now walked its halls. Kale found a small storage room and sat against the wall, eyes closed. His thoughts wandered back to Earth. To his mother. To the strange moments in childhood when she would disappear for days then return without explanation. He remembered once, when he was 8, asking if she had ever done anything dangerous. She had smiled but never answered. Now he wondered. Had she known this would happen? Had she planned for it? The final image the council members saw that day wasn't death or destruction. It was a message burned into every console, every datapad, every screen. A single line of text. The council is adjourned. The cleaner walked past the high tribunal hall, his mission unfinished but his message delivered. Earth did not forget. And Earth did not forgive. The silence in the council's primary chamber was thick, the kind that wraps around your ears and makes even your breath feel too loud. Turvac sat slouched in his high chair, once a throne, now a prison. His usually polished claws fidgeted against the polished surface, tapping out a rhythm that was more a cry for control than anything else. His fellow judges were either in lockdown, missing, or worse, unreachable by both word and technology. All security systems responded with the same static loop whenever he barked orders into the command panels. It had become clear that nothing he did could reach outside. He was sealed in. Not physically, perhaps, but strategically, completely cut off from power. Even his thoughts felt walled in by the quiet dread rising in the air around him. He had finally begun to understand the message that was being sent. Not vengeance. Judgment. Below, deep in the service corridors where recycled air hissed through old pipes, Kale moved through shadows with slow, measured steps. He had followed the trail of silent signs left behind, disabled sentries, redirected patrols, flickering lights that dimmed just long enough for him to pass unnoticed. The cleaner was clearing his path, guiding him without words. The thought unnerved him. Who was this person who knew his steps better than he did? He had expected to die in that cell. Now, he was walking straight into the heart of the palace. He passed the control room and paused, watching through the glass as 2 mercenaries sat slumped in their chairs, alive but in some sort of induced sleep. On the screen in front of them was a rotating image of him. Surveillance footage. Dozens of angles of his trial, including ones that had never been shown during the tribunal. From positions no camera should have had access to. The whole thing had been staged from the start. He turned away before the anger boiled over. Silex, isolated now from both Turvac's paranoia and the disappearing council infrastructure, locked himself in the lower observatory and replayed the hidden feeds. The cleaner had breached another level, this time the judicial sanctum, a chamber used only for decisions involving planetary destruction. It was a vault for the highest levels of abuse and cover-up. There, under the flickering glow of ancient projectors, the cleaner had revealed the truth. Silex watched, mouth dry, as footage showed bribed council members laughing while drafting the order against Kale. The plot had been to frame a human for the failure of a corporate neural implant rollout, one that would have cost the judges millions and lost dividends if exposed. Kale had simply been the easiest human in reach. A contractor, off-world, with a clean record and no political ties. He was never meant to survive the trial. Only serve as a scapegoat for investors. The files were damning. But it wasn't just that they existed, it was how they were gathered. The cleaner had pulled voice logs from sealed comms, hacked into medical implants to access memory playback, turned every hidden layer of the council into a spotlight. Silex finally understood why the cleaner wasn't just erasing people. He was peeling away the masks they wore. Kale emerged into a wide corridor leading toward the memorial wing, where portraits of the original founders of the Galactic Council lined the walls. Most humans didn't know it existed. It was rarely shown to outsiders. There, on a pedestal in the center of the room, was a glowing data crystal locked in a gravity seal. Kale stepped closer. The pedestal responded to his presence and hissed open. No alarms. No resistance. The crystal floated gently into his hand. He had no idea what it was until the room's display activated. A voice spoke, soft and synthetic. It welcomed him. Not as a prisoner, but as an heir to something forgotten. The founders, long ago, had included humans in their earliest treaties. Those records had been erased from public logs. This crystal held the original charter, one that listed Earth not as a new member, but as a co-founder. Kale's breath caught in his throat. The Council had not just framed him. They had buried Earth's legacy to keep its influence at bay. At that same moment, far above, in a private chamber hidden behind 3 biometric locks, Amira Vaz stood watching through a projection screen. Her face was calm but cold. The cleaner stood beside her. He had returned for this final moment not to strike, but to witness. She had not joined the mission in person. She hadn't needed to. Her preparation had been years in the making. Every network access, every dormant protocol, every contingency had been planted by her hand. And the cleaner had executed it flawlessly. The armor he wore had been modified by her, upgraded from a design she stole during her last classified operation decades ago. She had only one rule for its return. No civilian blood. Only the guilty. The cleaner had followed that rule to the letter. Silex's emergency broadcasts reached Earth at last. Not through the Council's systems, but through a public comm grid that used the old human deep space frequencies. The message was raw, unfiltered, and accidental. The truth spilled into public consciousness before anyone could stop it. Millions across the galaxy watched as he narrated the trial's forgeries, the Council's betrayal, the full list of human contributions stolen and hidden for decades. It wasn't just about Kale anymore. It was about Earth. A planet labeled primitive while its people were systematically exploited and erased from the history they helped shape. The reaction was immediate. Protests. Uprisings. Embassies evacuated. Council colonies went dark. Trade routes collapsed. And Turvac, now cornered in his own palace, had only one demand left. He wanted the cleaner brought to him. He believed, somehow, that he could still negotiate. The cleaner entered the chamber without fanfare. No guards. No doors broken. He just walked in, silent as ever. Turvac stood, his voice booming at first, declaring his authority, warning him that this path would lead to war. The cleaner didn't move. He set a small projector on the table and activated it. It showed Turvac's face approving the trial. His private logs mocking the human race. His signature on the falsified documents. Turvac's voice cracked as he tried to defend himself, but there were no words left that mattered. The cleaner raised his hand, not to strike, but to transmit. All files were instantly sent to every system in the chamber. Turvac was exposed, entirely, completely, publicly. Then, the final blow. Not death. Not pain. But erasure. The cleaner used a neural sync device that wiped his identity from every record the Council still controlled. Turvac would live, but to the galaxy, he no longer existed. No assets. No power. No past. Just a body, breathing, and completely irrelevant. A sentence worse than death for a man who built his life on legacy. As the cleaner turned to leave, Kale stood at the entrance, crystal still in hand. Their eyes met for the first time in full light. Kale didn't speak, but something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition. Not from face or voice, but from the way the cleaner nodded. A simple gesture he had seen as a child, years ago, when his mother once introduced him to an old friend who never gave a name. The rebuilding of the Galactic Council didn't happen in silence. It happened under the weight of outrage, broadcasted judgment, and voices that no longer feared the gavel. Turvac, now forgotten by every official system, wandered the lower halls of his own former palace, ignored by all. No records bore his name. No doors recognized his access. Where once he passed through with armies, he now walked unnoticed by janitorial drones. His face triggered nothing. His existence had been digitally severed. For the man who thought himself untouchable, it was a punishment far colder than execution. He was still breathing, still moving, still speaking, but the universe no longer listened. He had become a shadow without even the dignity of darkness to cling to. Above him, in the new tribunal hall, Silex stood on the center platform. Not as a judge. Not as a witness. But as a whistleblower, testifying before a newly formed interim council comprised of representatives from the systems that had long suffered beneath the council's corrupted structure. His voice trembled at first, but with each document displayed, each confession revealed, it steadied. He exposed the bribery networks, the trial manipulations, the backdoor deals. He showed how entire generations of humans had been kept at the edge of influence not because of weakness but because of fear. Earth, once dismissed as backward, had remained silent for too long. And now that silence had ended in a way no one would ever forget. Kale Voss watched from a quiet booth near the back. He wore no armor, no robe, no title. But when the footage of his trial played on the central screen, the room fell quiet. Everyone watched as his sentencing was delivered by a panel now either vanished, detained, or disavowed. Then came the clip of the cleaner entering the tribunal chamber just after his extraction. The way he walked. The way the room adjusted around him. And most notably, the way he never looked back. As if even the past wasn't worth acknowledging. Kale didn't speak for himself. He didn't need to. The files had already done that. His name was cleared. But more than that, he had become something unintentional. A symbol. Proof that the smallest target could unravel the largest lie. The transmission of the original founding charter had gone viral across the galactic net. The revelation that Earth was never an invited guest, but a co-founder, ignited a chain reaction. Treaties were called into question. Alliances fractured. Some systems offered Earth formal apologies. Others feared retribution. But Earth didn't respond with fire. It responded with memory. Old records were uploaded, showing early technological collaborations, planetary donations, even military defense agreements that had all been buried by Council redactors. Amira Voss had known these documents existed. She had simply waited for the right moment to bring them to light. She did not ask for war. She asked for recognition. And Earth, with its silence now shattered, stood not as a colony of apes flailing for a seat at the table, but as a partner demanding the table be rebuilt. Back in Colorado, in a cabin once hidden by snow and silence, Amira returned to her garden. She knelt beside the rosemary, now thriving from weeks of untouched peace. She no longer carried the weight of secrecy, but she did not celebrate either. Her son was alive, but changed. The universe had opened its eyes to Earth, yet she knew that awareness came with risk. Power never liked to be reminded it was mortal. And truth was a blade that never dulled. She reached into the soil and found it soft, malleable, able to be shaped again. That, she thought, is the only kind of justice that lasts. The kind that grows new roots. The cleaner, wherever he was, had vanished again. Some believed he had returned to Earth and buried himself deep in some underground base. Others claimed he was still in the Council's systems, watching, waiting. The Council's new AI refused to purge him. It recognized his code as a stabilizing force. It even renamed part of its command infrastructure after him. Protocol Ashen. A line of defense meant to activate only when corruption reached critical thresholds. Ironically, the very creature they once feared had become their firewall. Kale declined every offer the new council made. No ambassador title. No ceremonial recognition. No monetary compensation. Instead, he took the founding charter and used it to begin a new initiative. He called it the Ashen Accord. Its mission was simple. Protect the falsely accused. Track manipulation at the highest levels. Offer open defense to any being targeted by systems that no longer deserve their authority. It began with volunteers, spread with whistleblowers, and expanded with the same speed fear once moved through the galaxy. But this time, it was not fear that drove it. It was the need for balance. On a small outpost orbiting a quiet moon, a young alien girl was dragged before a private corporate tribunal. Accused of data theft, sentenced without trial, her cries were silenced by the tap of a gavel. Then a transmission interrupted the proceedings. A small ship appeared in orbit, marked not with a flag or threat, but a symbol. A circle. A slash. The judges paused. They knew what it meant. The trial was delayed. Evidence reviewed. Verdict reversed. The girl went free. No shots fired. No bodies left behind. Just a symbol and a warning that the days of silent injustice had ended. The galaxy didn't change overnight. The weight of centuries of control couldn't be lifted with a single broadcast or overturned in a single council meeting. But the balance had shifted. People remembered. And memory, once awakened, does not sleep again. Silex remained on the council for a time, helping shape reforms, guiding new leaders, and ensuring the systems built this time were transparent, decentralized, and accessible. But he too eventually vanished. No announcement. No farewell. He had served his part. And he knew the cleaner would return if ever things turned dark again. Turvac's name was never spoken again in official chambers. He wandered through old trade hubs now as a beggar, watched by those who vaguely recognized his face but couldn't quite place it. Children sometimes asked if he was someone important. Their parents only shook their heads. Not anymore. He lived among the forgotten, where power once lived but never returned. Kale visited Earth only once after the charter's release. He didn't go to his old apartment, or even the place he used to work. He went straight to the mountains. To the cabin. To the garden. Amira was waiting. She didn't speak when he arrived. She only handed him a glass of tea and sat beside him on the porch. The view hadn't changed. But the world had. He asked once, quietly, if she had always known something like this would happen. She replied only with a shrug. She hadn't known. She had prepared. That was the difference. As they sat, a message blinked on Amira's old encrypted terminal inside the cabin. One line. Quiet. Unassuming. Status check complete. No immediate threats detected. Protocol Ashen standing by. Neither of them got up to read it. They didn't need to. The message wasn't for them. It was for the galaxy. A quiet reminder that somewhere, in the soil or the sky, Earth's shadow still watched. And if the judges ever forgot again, it would return. Not with titles. Not with weapons. Just with silence. And one man who cleaned the mess.